I'm Andy Yan. I'm the director of the city program, as well as a new associate professor of professional practice in urban studies at Simon Fraser University. Hello, check. All right, one more. All right, this is gonna kind of be awkward because we have another couple hundred people online, so we got to get this fixed. So, is it working? All right, it's working. All right. Hi, I'm Andy Yan. Okay, we move forward. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming out tonight. I'd like to begin with the acknowledgement that we are on the unceded Indigenous land belonging to the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And just a few announcements before we get started, that the city program's spring 2024 classes are now open for registration, and to learn more, as well as to keep in touch with our classes, as well as our presentations and events, please feel free to pop in at sfu.ca/city. And tonight's talk is also made possible through a collaboration with the Urban Studies program at Simon Fraser University. The Urban Studies program is also now accepting applications for their master's and graduate diploma programs. More information can be obtained at sfu.ca/urban. And on with the program. Vancouver has been described as a setting in search of a city, and yet, oh, what a setting. That the land language of the city has been gifts of a metropolis framed by mountains, land, and water. Started in 1989, the City of Vancouver's view protection policy had helped frame and share this public commons. That where goes the future? That in October 2023, the Vancouver City Council passed a motion to review the view protection policy. Some think view cones may limit development, while others think it's part of what makes Vancouver's unique, as journalist John Mackey observed. Before we talk about the future, it is perhaps helpful to visit the past and the present, and how this policy was formed and what it did to shape Vancouver. So hence, the title of today's lecture or talk is Vancouver's View Protection Policy, How It Developed and How It Was Implemented. We have the great fortune to bring two prominent and distinguished figures in Vancouver's planning, architecture, and design communities to speak about Vancouver's view protection policy. The format of tonight is between two presentations from our speakers, as well as really an opportunity to have an interaction with the audience, both virtually and physically. That if you can submit your questions through Slido, we'll go through those questions first, and then perhaps, if there's time, we'll go through questions and we'll receive questions from the floor. With those questions, please be brief, please be concise. I'd like to introduce Dr. Anthony Pearl, the Director of Urban Studies at Simon Fraser University, to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Andy. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be back in person and online with these events again, and to co-sponsor with our colleagues and now co-faculty in the city program. Well, Vancouver wouldn't be what it is today without the A-team of urban planning, design, and architecture having a critical mass in this city. There's more than a few people in this room who are part of that team, but tonight we're very fortunate to have two star players from the team as our speakers, and it's my privilege to introduce them. I'll go in alphabetical order by the second letter of their last name, since the first one's the same. We'll begin with Larry Beasley, who was our chief planner here in the city of Vancouver, and went on to write the book figuratively and then literally on Vancouverism, and a book that we've used in our courses here, and which he's used, I'm sure, when he was a distinguished professor of practice and planning at UBC, which he just recently retired from. But he's still very active in a number of leadership roles, sitting on the board of the Green Line Transit Project in Calgary, has been on the board of TransLink, the National Capital Commission in Ottawa, and the Committee for International Economic Development in Rotterdam. Larry holds an Order of Canada and an honorary doctorate from SFU, which I cheered him on the stage when he got it over a decade ago. He's received the Kevin Lynch Prize from MIT and the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. Our second B speaker is Peter Busby, who has been an architect here in Vancouver for 4 decades, building approximately 150 buildings across Canada, including 3 at SFU and 4 at UBC, and many other residential and mixed-use commercial projects around the city. He's best known for bringing sustainability and design together by founding Canada's Green Building Council in 2002 and putting LEED into practice here in Canada. And he's won many awards, 6 Governor General's Awards, 11 Lieutenant Governor Awards for his architectural designs, and the RAIC Gold Medal. Also a holder of the Order of Canada. He has gotten an honorary doctorate, at least one that I know of, from Toronto Metropolitan University. So we're very fortunate to have Larry and Peter here tonight, and I will turn the floor over to Larry to get us started. Thank you.
So thank you, Anthony. Can you all hear me? Is it good now? Okay, great. I'm really glad to be here today to really engender a community-wide conversation about Vancouver's protected view corridors. I want to keep this pretty informal. I'm not even going to show you slides. Peter's going to do that because he's going to show you the technical side. But for me, what is very important in this whole evening is a conversation that we might have together with the people online, and I appreciate those hundreds who are online, and also with the people in this room. I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes. Peter's going to talk for about 15 minutes. And then we're just going to open it for questions and comments and have a good general discussion. And I'm going to ask Andy to cue both Peter and I when we only have 5 minutes to go, because we're both the kind of guys that could just go on forever, probably. So we'll need a bit of help on that score. I'm going to start by telling you what view corridors are, who they serve, and what value that they represent. Then I'll go on from there to talk about some of the questions that have been floating around our community and my take on it. And honestly, I'm going to give you some facts and I'm going to give you some opinions, and I hope you'll be able to differentiate those in the conversation that follows. First thing is, what is a public view corridor as we see them in Vancouver? It's made up of 3 things, very simply. It's our original idea: a public point, a corridor across the city, and a really cool thing to look at. It was the mountains, it was the landmarks such as the Salish people call it, the Two Sisters that are on the mountains. It was also the slopes of the mountains. And it was a very good thing for the people, walking along primarily False Creek, some other locations, but the south side of False Creek. And they arrived at the viewpoint, hundreds and hundreds of people every day are enjoying that view. And it's a very good way to connect people with our setting. But if you look a little further, you find that it's a lot more than what I've just said. And in fact, we discovered it's a lot more than what I just said as the view corridors started to become true and become real over time with the development of buildings. What we really have in these corridors is a view shed. And 2 groups of people particularly enjoy that shed. Number one, if you're south of the corridors and you're anywhere, say on the south slope that's there, you're going to look at that, you're going to look through the corridors, and you're going to see glimpses of the mountains. Maybe it won't be the full glimpse, but you're going to get an openness there. But even more important, and this is where we made the real discovery, is the hundreds of people who have units all along the corridors in the heart of the downtown. And these were saving views that we didn't even think about at the time, but became really the great beneficiaries of the view corridor policy, because they're in the smaller units, often not the most expensive units, in the heart of the downtown. They're not the glamorous units out on the edge with the spectacular views, but the view corridors gave them a glance out, a sense of respite, a sense of space. And so as we were intensifying the city, it was amazing how we kept livability, the quality of livability in our city, even at high densities, because we had that respite. Now, we had other factors as well, but I came to see the view corridors through the years as just, one of the main ways that we could keep the quality as we also introduced so many more people living downtown. So my point in all of this is that the view corridors are serving hundreds of people, not just a few members of the public, but also many people in their units. And when you calculate that over all the view corridors, that's thousands of beneficiaries every single day, not paying a nickel, not having to do anything special, but live in the city. So what's the value of the view corridors? Well, at first glance, going back to the original idea, it's pretty obvious. If you're a member of the public, you catch a view from time to time, and it's a lovely thing. That idea of keeping connected to our mountains and our water is something very, very important to the gestalt of the city. And so it's a nice amenity for those people. But then if you look deeper and you go to those people I've started to talk about, I call them the view corridor dwellers, the people who live along the view corridors and south of the view corridors. They're not just getting livability. They're also getting financial value. This is the thing that's very seldom understood. We know that in this city, if you talk to any real estate person, they're going to show you and tell you that in this city, views are valuable. So every floor in a building, as you sell it, if it enjoys a view, probably 25 or 30,000 more. And again, remember, these are not the glamour views. These are not the glamour units, the $6 and $10 million units. These are the modest units that not only have that livability, but they have value that they have been able to enjoy over all these years. But if you go even further, there's something else going on with the view corridors in terms of value, which I think has to be highlighted a lot more. It starts with experience, the experience we have of the city. Experience gives memory of the city and our judgment about the city. That memory leads to attitude. And in fact, the whole city is pervasively being connected to the mountains and to the water, to our setting, creating the very image of our city, creating the very brand of our city. You know, when I first started, when there were only a few towers, we did enjoy an amazing setting. Most people had wonderful experience of that setting. Well, that started to close in. But now we protected it. We protected it for so long. And so my point in this part of the presentation is that there is tangible financial as well as experiential value to the view corridors. And there is important value for our economy because it sets the very image of our city. View corridors are, and I want to make this really clear, one of the unique community commonwealths of our city. As important as our parks, as important as many of the other things, the amenities that we enjoy in our city. Remembering that as we invited tens of thousands of people to come and live in the dense city, we also said to them, we're going to make sure you have amenity and quality of life. You're not going to be crammed as you are in Toronto and some other cities in the world. You're going to have a lot of attention to quality of life. So that's where the values are. I want to give you a little bit of history about how these came about, what was going on. It started really back in 1987, 88, around that time. We were just introducing the Living First strategy downtown, and the idea that we were inviting all the people to come back, and the idea that there was going to be a lot of development. We were opening up big areas for development to make that happen. The idea, it was before sustainability, but we just understood that taking the pressure off the edges of our city was so important to keeping a quality natural environment as well as an urban environment. But there was a problem. Every single development application was a battle. Every single development application was a struggle over what views were going to be lost, what views were going to be saved. Of course, we had to broker the private views, but people's real struggle had to do with the loss of all the public views that they had just come to expect, and all of a sudden they were going like that. They were going so fast in each development. It was politically fraught. It was expensive to developers. It was frustrating for citizens, and frankly for the staff, it was very painful, application by application. And so we in the city, under the leadership of the then director, Ray Spaxman, I was the deputy director for downtown at that time, we said, okay, we have to start trying to figure out a policy to manage this. It can't be so ad hoc as all this. And so we started doing some work. But just a little bit of time into that work, Mayor Gordon Campbell, the mayor at the time, got very frustrated at us. It's taking too long. We're still having to live the bad side of the politics of this thing. We need you to do this better. And he even had words with Ray Spaxman, which I was reading some old newspaper articles, became quite a spat in the scheme of things. And I sat with them and I said, why don't we bring in some expertise? Why don't we don't have the expertise to do what really needs to be done here. And so what we did is we decided, the council then decided, that we would in fact bring in a true full consultant team. And they would systematically look at this views issue, and they would involve the public. And I don't just mean casually, I mean a lot of the public in a lot of conversation about these views. And so we would define which views would stay and which views would go, and we would all agree on that. And we could then calmly get about doing the densification that we needed to do. And everyone would abide by the rules thereafter. Livability would be protected. The work was in-house, managed day-to-day by Mike Kemble, who was one of my senior planners, a very smart fellow with a very good urban design concept. But what we did is that we brought in a great team. And we didn't just try to manage that ourselves. We created a committee that was composed of councilors and staff to manage that, to make sure there was no cheating going on as the project was going on. And we hired Peter Busby. It was, at that time, his firm was called Peter Busby and Associates to do the technical work. And it was complex. It was a lot more complex than I think even he thought at the beginning. They had to innovate in so many ways. In fact, he's going to show you, they created the first three-dimensional computer model of this city that had ever existed. And in addition to that, we brought in Bob Thompson, who was a distinguished public engagement expert, to involve tens of thousands of people in all kinds of ways, in surveying, in meetings, in conversations, and games, and all kinds of ways to involve people. And we brought in Jay Wallenberg from Coriolis to look at the financial implications, the economic implications, and particularly the implications for developers. And they did their work, and it took them a year. It might have taken the staff 3 years, but it took them a year, and they did a very, very brilliant job. And then in late 1989, council was able to adopt the View Corridor policy. It was, I think, unanimous. I'm not quite sure of that, but it was very, very popular, and it was very popular with the public, and it was among the first of its kind in the world. Now, there were a couple of cities that had view protection of landmarks, you know, the National Capitol in Washington or the whatever. But we were the first city, I think, in the world that said, let's make our environment valuable and important, and let's protect views. So just as sustainability was starting to hit the world, and the idea of custodianship of the natural environment was starting to hit the world, we put an experiential factor to that for the first time. And we did it with independent insight through the consultants, working with the politicians, working with the staff. My point in this part of the conversation is that this was a non-biased, rigorous, methodical process, and it had a very popular outcome, and it was very groundbreaking from a technical point of view. And in fact, it caused a calmness to come back to that development application process where it all started. Then, almost 35 years have gone forward. We're 34 years now, I think. And we've seen that massive growth in the city. So what has happened? Well, absolutely consistently, the view corridors have been protected. There's been very careful management. Hundreds of buildings have been built, hundreds. But developers, and there are no exceptions that I know of, cooperated in that. And they all cooperated on the basis of faith that if they cooperated, we'd make sure everyone else cooperated. And so no one would get special treatment. And you can see how, you can protect a view for 25 years, 20 years. One developer, one building can steal that view away from all those people I told you about and leave that view with maybe 25 people who will pay $50 million for those views. This won't be the affordable housing. And so all the beneficiaries and all the benefits that I've described really came down and were very, very consistently solidified. Now, we offered some options to developers. We wanted to make sure there was no economic impact on developers. So first thing is we reshaped buildings to keep out of the view corridors, not all the towers. And any architect will tell you, you can achieve high density with a tower or with a lower building with a different massing. There's many ways to do that. Secondly, we said, all right, if in fact you're going to still lose density from what the zoning allows, we'll allow you to trade that density off to another site, sell it to someone else, and make the money to augment your pro forma. Now, I don't think we've ever had to use that second thing because in every case we were able to reshape the buildings in a very nice way. We also then, a couple years later, we said to ourselves, well, we sometimes like to have rezonings and a little bit higher buildings, and we want to get some of those CACs sometimes. And so we went back and we did what was called the skylines study. And by that time, Ray Spaxman was retired, and he took on that study, again, working with thousands of our citizens. And he looked at all kinds of skylines, and we looked at the art of the skyline, and we looked at all aspects, and we determined locations, many locations where you could have taller buildings. And in fact, we wanted some taller buildings for emphasis in some places, and they were always away from where the view corridors were, so there was no problem with that. But it did open up opportunity for growth to happen where it didn't have a negative effect on the views. Then a lot of us retired, and along came Brent Todderan. He's here today. He was then the director of planning. And in 2009, he led a review. I call it the 20-year perspective. After 20 years, under the help with Kevin McNaney and his team at the time, they did a proper review. Now, they weren't looking at removing the view corridors and eliminating them, but they knew they had much better technology, and could they refine it? Could they see where, okay, maybe some of them aren't quite working the way we had hoped, et cetera, and they did a proper study, and they reviewed it with the public again, and they confirmed the public popularity of that. My point in telling you this history over the last 34 years is that public views have been protected and delivered big time with low developer impacts, with lots of alternatives opened up for growth and for getting some of those CACs that we wanted through rezonings. that it's been popular, and that's been reinforced over and over again, but we never took it for granted. We always went back and asked our citizens, by the tens of thousands, what they thought. We got high value, low costs, a lot of benefits from the view corridors. So that's the history. I now want to cover some questions that have been posed, and this is probably where you'll begin to hear my opinions as well. So I'll fess up to that. First, are view corridors really necessary? If you don't care about the quality of your city, no. If you don't care about the intensity and how it is to live in very intense circumstances, in tall buildings close together, then no. But if you do care about those things, then the view corridors are very, very valuable. They're very important to us. Second, it's also important to me to stay in an honorable relationship with all those developers who for 35 years have cooperated. Not say now, well, this one developer can now ruin it for everyone, and also ruin it for the hundreds of people all along the corridors and all the other people enjoying it, as well as the public. So they're very valuable in terms of, and are necessary in terms of this thing we have to do, which is to keep the identity of our city as a city in the mountains and the water, and that makes us different than almost any city in the world, and very special. Not only from the edges, but in the heart of the city as well. My second question often posed to me is, do view corridors really limit opportunities for affordability, particularly affordable housing? And we know that there has been some idea that maybe we'll give up a few views and we get some affordable housing. I think that's modestly so, but I'm not sure it gives you the total cost benefit of that question. You see very quickly, oh yeah, if you get some affordable housing, who cares about the view? That's the nature of which I've heard some of the conversations. I like to use an example of one building. So one building is going to be built in the heart of, in the middle of the view corridor, blocking out all the view. Not only are you taking that view from thousands and giving it to a few rich people, but you're not getting very much for it. Let's say you get 5 floors of affordable housing. 5 units per floor, that's 20 units. 20 units of affordable housing at the cost of hundreds of units that lose their quality, that lose their value because they no longer have a view. I just don't think that's a very good cost benefit in the equation. And then, yes, we need to open up, have opportunities for CACs and some rezonings, but is it a good idea to give up amenity in order to get a few goodies? Don't we need amenity and goodies? And we've got lots of opportunities still for rezonings that can give us more amenity. I was working in an area of Vancouver called the False Creek Flats, 500 acres, where we have already proposed tens of thousands of affordable rental housing units if the council would pay attention to that. That's a real opportunity, and it's only one of the opportunities. Peter can show you a number of others. I read the article recently from the Daily Hive where they said, well, view corridors could trade off our ability to do transit-oriented development. I go back to what I said earlier. If, in fact, you bring architects and urban designers into the equation, they will show you how to achieve that density without necessarily having the tallest buildings on the planet. And by the way, often in the Broadway area, for example, it's better to have buildings more scale to the neighborhood than just to have buildings that are tallest and that you can possibly think of, really diminishing the neighborhood. So I don't think that really these view corridors do offer very many opportunities for affordability. The third question is, do they really limit growth, particularly of things like hotels that we need? And do they limit our ability to get CACs through rezonings? Again, not very much. because we already gave many opportunities. We don't allow towers to just be built anywhere. We don't say in the rest of the city, well, if you didn't have any single-family areas, you wouldn't have any housing problem. We don't say that. We know that there's different kinds of places we want in our city. And we know that we can achieve those without necessarily intruding on the view corridors. The fourth issue is one I hear a lot, which is, does it really make too much of a deal if we just get rid of one view corridor? And I say yes, because every view corridor you lose is a nail in the coffin of all the view corridors. But even more important, because, and let me tell you why. If I, as the director of planning, said to one developer, oh yeah, you can break the view corridor, how could I say to the next developer, no, you can't, or the next one, no, you can't? That would be dishonorable. That would not be good government. So it has to be something that everyone abides by, as they have done for the last 33 years. And more importantly, all of those beneficiaries I've talked about just are the losers as we go. So my point in this part is this to say, let's not be casual about trading away view corridors and shifting view benefits from the thousands of people to just a few hundred people. And whenever we're thinking about that, let's always remember beyond the cost benefits to individuals, what is the implication for our city, for its very image? Now, there's two other questions I'll close in that I also do hear a lot. One of them is, okay, the council's talked about a review of view corridors. Is that really a bad thing? Well, maybe it is a bad thing. Maybe it is a bad thing because we did that review a number of years ago. We were able to deal with some glitches that were there with our better technology. And then we said to everyone, now we abide by what the results are. I don't know if we want to put into jeopardy now that cooperation that we've had by developers and everyone else. More importantly, I see the city as a generational thing that develops. And at some point, this generation, this first generation of our transformation will be done, or pretty much done. And we'll start thinking about redevelopment and rebuilding. And at that time, maybe we will do a review of the view corridors. But I just don't think that we need to do it now. And I don't think that we should even point out one and say, well, that's not so good. And I could tell you that the Queen Elizabeth view is not very good up there anymore because trees have grown. But I'm not going to be the one that says that's an important. Maybe the Parks Board should cut a few trees. Maybe that's the answer to the question. And then the final question is, okay, if they are going to do this review, what are the essential elements of that process? And to me, there are 5. One is there can be no bias to start out the view corridor review. You can't say, as the first resolution of council before it was amended said, to do the review for the purpose of eliminating views. I don't think you can say that. There can't be bias. Second, it's got to be rigorous in its 3-dimensional technical analysis. Peter's going to show you just how technical that is, just how much you have to know in order to really be protecting views. Third, it does also have to have a rigorous financial and experiential cost-benefit analysis. Who gains? Who loses? What values are at stake? Not just the obvious thing that we may see, there's a project where there's a few social housing units as compared to, the loss of the view for a few members of the public who might go and look at that view on the south side of False Creek. It's not that simple. So it has to be a really strong, rigorous analysis of cost benefits. Fourth, it has to have a strong analysis of the implications for the economy, for tourism, for our civic brand, for our image in the world. We're trying to take our place as a world city. We're trying to be one of the places that's an anchor for the modern world. And really, that's we've got to see whether or not removing corridors is taking away from that objective. And then finally, and probably most importantly, you all have to be involved. There has to be wide public engagement, as wide or wider than we did back in 1988 or 89, primarily 89. We have to talk to tens of thousands of people. Maybe it's even a vote, I don't know. But it can't be the kind of casual, online, occasionally you connect with someone who happens to be online. No, it has to be community discussion. It has to be community events. And all of you have to have more than one opportunity to weigh in on what views are important and which ones, if they should be changed, how they should be changed. And my point here is that protected views are a unique treasure for our city, and they should never be randomly traded away without a very rigorous and deliberate process, not just of technical work, but of public discussion. Never should we say to ourselves, well, there is a project that might have a few units, and who cares about this particular view? Because there will always be some argument for that. I can tell you in every single case when I've seen that, there's been arguments. It's got to be more coherent, comprehensive, and holistic in the way we deal with these issues. So I want to now turn it over to Peter, but I want to leave you with just a couple of final thoughts. First, I think we should establish a principle in our city that protected public views and the community implications and beneficiaries of that are, in principle, a good thing. They're not a casual thing. Second, let's think bigger and more broadly about how we want to grow, about how we want to achieve our affordability. Let's look at these opportunities that are not even being discussed in our city right now, rather than diminishing the amenity that we said was a promise to people and I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people who came back against all odds to live in our city rather than escaping to the suburbs. Against all odds, who are not using their cars, who are using transit, who are walking, who are adding daily to the richness of our community. Well, we promise them amenity. We can't diminish that for those people. And then thirdly, if we do a review, I won't say it all again, let's just be rigorous and inclusive. And let's take all the time we need. Let's not be rushed by an individual proposal or proposition. Let's really do this as a community together. And then finally, I would say, if anything I've said today is meaningful for you, this is one time where you have to write to council. You have to tell council, every single one of you, what your view is, because I worry there's not going to be another chance. So you have to spend 15 minutes, write a postcard to City Hall, somehow get your opinion about these view corridors on the table. And if we do that, maybe we'll be able to save this amazing commonwealth that we have in the views. We wouldn't trade away our parks. We wouldn't trade away our amenities. We wouldn't trade away our water. As a matter of fact, we protect our water bodies. So why would we trade away our views? That's what I ask. Thank you very much.
Whew, cell phone here. Had a little. All right.
While Andy gets set up, let me just show you. This is the Vancouver View Study from 1989. And this is the floppy disk. A bunch of you don't even know what a floppy disk is.
right, we're all right, here we go, one more time. And we're good, clicker's good.
Right here? Yeah.
All right, and we're not having our slide show. Anyone with more?
These people
advanced-
want to see it as well,
Yes,
not just the folks online.
I can do a shadow puppet show, as he describes it. My degree in modern dance can become actually useful now.
This just isn't plugged into.
Oh, wait, oh,
Yes, I think that's John's
that's
side.
the wrong plug.
Yes.
That's the wrong plug. Oh, okay, here we go. There we go. All right,
There we go.
all right.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm not quite the presenter that Larry is, but we've done an awful lot of things together over the years, and it's just wonderful to share the stage with him now. I want to start by a couple of things. This is an image of the three-dimensional model we built in 1989. Google Street View didn't exist. Google didn't exist. People didn't have cell phones. We didn't have those types of things. It's a very long time ago. It's 34 years ago. What you do see in this view is the fact that we created contours of the North Shore Mountains. And the two sisters that Larry referred to are in the upper left there, known by colonialists as the Lions. But so are the valleys and Seymour Mountain and Crown Mountain. They're all there. This is also the development that existed at the time. You can see there's no development on the Concord lands. There's no development in downtown South. The West End was pretty well built out. The downtown core had a significant number of buildings. But we were able to define view cones based on survey results. This is the process we went through. This is a little bit of a history lesson. So you're looking at, a survey conducted by Coriolis, who interviewed a lot of people and came out with where are their preferred views, what do they like, where are they standing when they look at the view. Places like the waterfront walkway in False Creek, Granville Island, places like that. Then there was a physical view cone analysis, which we did, and then the economic impacts, and finally a summary which went to council and was approved by council. The view survey results, most people enjoyed features such as the North Shore Mountains. They wanted to keep them and see them as much as they could. And then 86% of the people agreed with the statement that the city should take stronger action to protect views, even if it requires significant restrictions on new development. And I think Larry has put that in perspective. They didn't lose the opportunity, they had to shape the opportunity. One of the classic buildings in the city that responds perfectly to a view cone is the Shangri-La Hotel. Two of the sides of the hotel are bounded by streets, but the third side, the triangular side, is the view cone edge. And all those people who live on that edge of the building have views protected forever unless council changes their mind. Public meetings were held. Many public meetings were held. And a substantial majority agreed to the statement that the city should take strong action to protect views. And they chose views that are important to the residents, height restrictions that are workable in Vancouver, and public meetings held in Robson Square with 60 speakers, and again, a substantial majority of the people involved in the whole process agreed that the city should take strong action to protect the views. And, oh, I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? Am I going backwards? Nope. Sorry. Hang on, folks. So this is the actual process we went through. We first of all built the 3D model of the city, then we took photographs of the views and overlaid them on the model. Then we defined three-dimensional view cones technically with floors in them, which would define how high buildings could be under those view cones and how high they could be at the edges. This again is the three-dimensional model. We concentrated on ensuring the things that people like to see, the North Shore Mountains in particular, were part of the structure of the three-dimensional model, so we could go down on the ground and look up through the city and see the mountains beyond. We then took, this is just 3 photographs of the different view cones, but this was one view cone from the south shore of False Creek. At that time, the view of Hotel Vancouver with the mountains in behind it was a treasured view for Vancouverites. It helped define what the city was like and was about. The view cone down Granville Street was important because you had city developing on both sides, and now it's really developed on both sides, but you always had that reference to the view in the distance. This is the view from Queen Elizabeth Park that Larry referred to. It doesn't exist anymore because trees have been grown up. I just went up there today just to check, and you can't see any of this. So perhaps that's one obsolete view cone. It's in fact not enforced much anymore anyway. So there are a whole series of views that people liked, which were not threatened. And you can see they're all waterfront views, ends of piers and Stanley Park and so on. Those were very important views for the public. They said so. They also liked some views that were not threatened unless rezoning occurred and heights were developed. And there were only a few of these. Street end views were very important. They have been protected ever since, and people, it gives people their bearing. They know where they are when they're downtown, looking down a street end. Can they see mountains, or can they see the ocean? Can they see water? This is what the analysis resulted in. So the cones are defined by the edges, and then the floor of the cone is defined by height measured in meters from zero. And I'll just zoom in on one of them here. See quite a few from Granville Island, quite a few from False Creek, quite a few from major arterials. But the most impact, of course, does this have a, yes. The most impact, of course, was the downtown West End. Not so much, it was developed already. CBD, developed already. Concord didn't exist. Downtown South didn't exist. These cones were defined because they were looking at the mountains. We then did a impact analysis. And I guess I'll zero in on that one a little bit as well. Sites with no significant impact are the dark ones. Little or no loss of height are the blue ones. Yellow ones have loss of outright height, negligible. And then sites with severe impact are located here. And then we turned this information over to Coriolis, and they did a financial analysis of the impact, and the planning department did this work to offer alternatives to developers to reshape their projects or reduce some setbacks and so on, so they could get the same density on the site. The zoning for downtown South was developed after these view cones and reflects the idea that you could house, I don't know, 20,000 people in downtown South under the view cones quite successfully. The development of Concord Pacific became this high, low, high, low, high idea, mountains and valleys, but those low areas were the areas that protected the view cones going north to the mountains. The relevance of the view study today, my observations, again, this is now is my opinion. You've had Larry's, this is mine, very similar in almost every way. Some cones might be outdated, vegetation growth, they need to be checked. First Nations property rights didn't exist in those days. So SAC, the development on both sides of the Broad Street Bridge, would break view cones. It will break view cones. It has, by the time it's built out. But their property rights are more important than those views registered some 34 years ago. Some views might be less important today, such as bridge views. You know, remember 34 years ago, people were driving to and from work. And so they said, well, I like to enjoy the view of the snow on the mountains as I'm going to work. Well, now they're taking transit to work, so perhaps they're on buses and they are seeing them. So that could be reevaluated. And there are new civic priorities, transit-oriented development, which is so very, very important. I'll just go back to plan. And you can see in this plan here, the nodes that we're talking about for development, big one at Granville, out here at Arbutus, all the way out here. The only one that was heavily impacted was the Cambie Street. The Cambie Street node, but all of the other TOD nodes are not affected by the view studies, and you can put density and height there where it should be going forward. I believe strongly the key downtown cones of the views of the mountains should be kept. As Larry said, they define the character of our city. They make it unique in all of the world. We talked to in the process, we talked to 72 other cities about whether they had view cones. About 5 of them actually responded positively that they did. And they were, again, as Larry said, views of buildings, views of Parliament Hill in Ottawa, views of the Congress in Washington. We are different. We live on the West Coast. We enjoy nature. We enjoy the mountains. We enjoy the views. And they define, they allow thousands of downtown residents to enjoy views, not just the rich in the waterfront. And again, I'll go back to this drawing and show you that, you know, the people who live on the edge of these cones, stretching right back into downtown South, can see out of their buildings and can see up the cone. Yes, they probably have to go like this in the window or go out on their balcony, but they're there. And they're, you know, Larry talked about hundreds of people with views. I think there are thousands and thousands of people with views to the mountains living in the downtown core. And those views are protected by the cones themselves. I think if the cones are repealed, council might want to think about the legal implications of that. If I've bought a unit and I've lived there for 30 years and I've had a view because there was a bylaw in place and the development occurred in a certain way as a result of that bylaw, and now you're taking it away from me to allow that building to happen, I think there's probably going to be implications coming out. But the most important thing for me, and I'll make this point one more time, is that they define Vancouver and our relationship to nature. There are many other density and height opportunities elsewhere in the downtown core and on the adjacent core. Larry mentioned the Falls Creek Flats, 500 acres. That's east from the Science Center. It's not under any view cones at all. And you could probably house another 150,000 people there in mixed. It's the, you know, when you go to Paris, you go to La Défense. They didn't mess up the downtown for density. They took a piece of land away from the core. Canary Wharf in London. In Washington, D.C., outside the city, there are dense developments. There's now LeBreton Flats happening in Ottawa that, again, does not obstruct any of the views. So perhaps what we should be doing is looking elsewhere for the affordability and opportunity to build a density going forward. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
All right, so we're just going to shift over to our question phase of our presentation tonight. I'll make sure that.
Can you hear me? Hey, can you hear me? How do you turn this?
All right, if we can get some technical assistance here. Hello, okay. Any luck? No luck, no luck, no joy. Okay, we're back in a sec, but okay. Unfortunately, with a sizable proportion of our audience today actually online, we got to get this fixed. Otherwise, they'll just see 3 people on screen, kind of just saying hi. But yes, if you can kind of bear with us for a bit.
There,
Oh, there we go. Good. All
all
right.
on.
We're good. We're good. Excellent. We're good.
If you unplug that jack there, this should disappear.
Yep.
And then the camera should
Yep.
be looking at us.
Yep, definitely. All right.
That's the architect for you.
As the architect, yes. All right. So I think that for our event right now. Yes, actually, I think we are now out of mics. I think.
Nope,
wait,
there's
we have
one there.
We have one
Yep.
there. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Holly. Light on the stage. Can we get some lights on the stage? Sorry. There's no lights on the stage. All right. No, this a conversation on planning in the dark. Not the first time this happened in this town. But all right, okay, working with this, we work with what we got. I'll start off with the question that we received off of Slido, and the first one actually is one perhaps about one about, well, have there been considerations to add view corridors over the time, particularly for new dense. Wow, this might be a Brent Todderan question.
Yeah, well, I can take that question because the one thing that I really enjoyed about the study done in 2009 under Brent's leadership was that they did say, were there now new corridors that were emerging as the city developed, and they did add some corridors. And I think that was a very useful thing. When the city, I go back to my principle that the city is still building, and it's building truthfully with the view corridors, but once the city settles into this generation's pattern, and we do start thinking about redevelopment, maybe there are other view corridors that need to be added. Who knows? That's the study for a later time, in my opinion. And even then, I would make sure that thousands of people were involved, the same as we had. I wouldn't do it just casually. The implications are too big.
When view cones protections were amended, were there further parameters that were also kind of put into the decision?
When they were amended?
In 2009?
In 2009?
I think they used the same, Brent, I'm going to look at you here, but I think they used the same basic methodology. They established the possible widths, and then they established a realistic base, and then they went. And I don't think they added corridors in too many dense areas, because that had already been covered. It was more in areas that they thought might develop as the city changes in the future.
It was the downtown east side in Chinatown where the new view corridors from Olympic Village and the Olympic Plaza,
Yeah.
the 4 new corridors.
So those had been areas where we had not envisioned development too much. Downtown east side and Chinatown had been areas where there had not been, in our generation, much thought that there would be development. And there was a beginning to be a worry, well, there could be some, and if there are, let's get ahead of it by defining the corridors. Yeah.
We provided council with options on new ways to answer the question, and council initially suggested an appetite that they wanted to. And at the last minute, I got the call that morning that council was giving me the heads up that they weren't going to do any changes because they had done polling.
So for our audience online, that was a comment from Ben Todderan, a former planning director for the city of Vancouver, talking about how the options were given but then were removed from the council of its day due to polling. So thank you. Thank you, Brent. All right. I think I'll shift it over to questions from the floor. And again, please make your questions brief and concise. And Rebecca will be our mic mic holder, and we'll pass it over to the first question.
A simple question. Some current council members have said that there was a lot of emphasis made on the people driving across the bridges and whatever, in terms of how we determined what view cones were important. And it strikes me that now that we're spending a fortune on the Granville Street Bridge and we've reworked the Burrard Street Bridge and whatever, that the emphasis for people on that bridge to see the views are not the drivers but the pedestrians. So kind of any comment about the emphasis you placed on drivers at the time?
Well, I'll speak, and I know Peter will too. I think we did have a bit of an emphasis on people driving and, you know, the beauty of that. But to me, if we now have a pedestrian route along the Granville Bridge, for example, the views become equally important to those pedestrians. It's not, you know, yes, people who take transit. A lot of that transit's on buses, but we're trying to establish a kind of city where people walk. And isn't it great that you don't walk in a jungle of buildings, but you walk through an array of buildings with glimpses and views always of the mountains and the water. If you look that way, yes, you get the water. But if you look that way, you can see the mountains too. And so I think it doesn't change dramatically just because we're shifting more to walking, which I agree we have to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Larry. You know, the number of pedestrians crossing the bridges or bicyclists crossing the bridges 34 years ago was negligible. It just wasn't there. But people we interviewed who were driving to and from work, they had strong opinions. So those views are there. But now they're being transferred to the people who don't necessarily drive across, taking buses or taking bicycles or walking. There's always people on those bridges all the time.
I think biking is also a really important event.
Absolutely.
An extraordinary experience to kind of go
Yeah.
through each bridge and kind of watch how the views kind of emerge as you ride a bike.
Which is also why, and this is not the topic of today's discussion, but our street end views are also very important. The views that we protected, you know, in many cities, as the new areas built, they forgot about the views along the streets. We were very careful about that, and you saw the picture that Peter showed us of the street end views. You got to realize that our idea was to take a series of overlays of views to create this great experience where you'd never lose track of where you were. Street end views, protected views, private views that have to be brokered with every development, those kind of things.
I'm thinking of Toronto's waterfront development from the 80s on that just obstructed everybody's view of the lake.
Right.
If you think about those towers along the waterfront there. And now they're spending billions to move the waterfront walk to the other side of those crummy developments from the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Right.
Yeah.
There's also the convention center in San Diego.
Yeah.
That just gets dropped like a battleship that blocks all these remarkable views of the water that coming to Vancouver is just one you just realize it's extraordinary.
I want to tell a little story because I think it kind of humanizes this. We were working on the plan for the north side, the lands on the north side of downtown. And as you know, that was one big development area. And at one point we had a meeting and we had 10 different landowner buildings and their lawyers and their architects. And we had to really say, okay, where exactly can we put these buildings? Saving the street end views, protecting as many private views as we could. Where's the optimum place? And I think that was, and we achieved it. And we went out of the room and everyone was able to sign on on the bottom line of what we had done. And to me, that is the essence of what our planning process should be about. It shouldn't be about saying, let's wipe out views, or let's say we want transit-oriented development rather than views. We can go in and we can work with our community and work with our citizens, work with our landowners, and to find out where, we could put it at a little extra height here, or we could put a little extra height there. I think of the Queen Elizabeth view, for me, it's not about necessarily removing that view, but now understanding that that view could have a component of city skyline, which is equally as important as the natural skyline. And so we could actually sculpt that. That's where I think you have proactive planning and coordination between City Hall and community.
Another question, Colleen?
Good evening, gentlemen. Larry, you talked a lot about the quality of livability, and you also talked about consulting with tens of thousands of Vancouverites to come to this conclusion. And yet today, seemingly density trumps livability. And the residents' input is treated or derided as NIMBYism. How do you reconcile these things as we look into the future? I think that is a key question.
You know, it's an interesting question because for me it's not difficult. To me, I will always believe in the intelligence and judgment of our citizens if you get them in a good conversation. Not try to lay a trip on people, but actually have a conversation. I've worked in communities adding, housing for people coming out of prison in the community. And people said, oh, that's a terrible idea. But once we began to work with people and we saw, okay, here's how you do that and here's what you put in place, people were very logical and they came forward with ideas. I have said, even with the Broadway plan, people may have heard this and we're getting a bit off topic, but even with the Broadway plan, the idea, the principle of the transit-oriented development of the Broadway plan is great. Now they need to go back with some neighborhood planning and decide exactly how that can be done without removing the existing affordable housing and without necessarily destabilizing the communities, the neighborhoods. To me, the essence of this whole city, in addition to our setting, are our neighborhoods. And we can do that together. We don't have to have, we have to go back to some old-fashioned techniques where you sit face-to-face. What do you think? You know, you talk to people and you listen.
I think I'm speaking for both of us when I say we support increased density. I do anyway, for sure. And
I
Larry
do
has
too.
always.
I do too.
That I'm aware of. So it's not about saving the corridors to reduce density and growth and population numbers. It's about preserving the things we like in the city, and that's the views.
Another question.
We might want to go over here occasionally. Okay.
All right. Pass my mic over there.
Hello, Larry. Thank you to Larry and to Peter for all your great work here in Vancouver. As someone who spent a lot of time in Vancouver and a lot of time in the third world where urban planning is something of an afterthought, it's just great to come back here and see this fantastic jewel of a city that we have. Peter, Larry, you were exhorting us to send postcards to City Council. Yes, and Peter, you, at the end of your presentation, really were pushing to preserve the view corridors. Are either of you suggesting that they're under threat?
I think they're under threat. I think they're under threat. I look at the resolution as it was first put forward at council, and it actually said, that resolution, the first part of it, it said, review the view corridors with the intent to eliminate them. Now, fortunately, councilors had better thoughts, and they edited out some of that. But I'm anxious that the bias is still there, and that if the staff's performance doesn't eliminate, they'll be seen as failures and not doing their job. And that really worries me. You know, that's why I'm saying that I'm not sure this is a time for a review. I would like to see a review when we are dispassionate. And Brent Totteran found the time when we were dispassionate about it, in the sense that, yes, we'd look at, but we weren't saying, no, let's get rid of them. So I think they may be under threat. The second thing is, I know there's one or two corridors where there's one or two proposals that are just hoping that those corridors get demolished so that they can do those proposals. And I know the dynamic at City Hall between the development community and the political community and the staff community. And I know the struggle that's there. And I'm not saying there's a bad person in this. I'm just saying there are different interests at play. And so I think we're better to say, let's confirm our corridors. And I must just say that I really agreed with Peter when he said, I particularly feel that way about the corridors that go right over the downtown peninsula in particular, because that's the area that we are getting so dense and so close together in our buildings and losing so much of our amenity that we're now having to broker shadowing on public streets as well as view corridors. Well, that's a good thing. That's what the art of design is about. But I would rather go with the art of design rather than a random review to get rid of things. That's my opinion.
All right.
My name is Devin Knight, and I live in the Citygate complex at the east end of False Creek, and I benefit all the time from the new view corridor from Olympic Village. Before tonight, I only thought about the benefits to pedestrians of wandering around and looking at the views, and also the importance of the view corridors for our tourism industry. And it never occurred to me that people who live downtown on the edge of the view corridors are also big beneficiaries. So maybe the rest of you also knew this, but I think everybody in this room should talk to whoever you know who lives downtown, and make sure that they know this and get them to write postcards to City Hall. Because I'm not so sure that everybody downtown is that well informed about why they have such a beautiful view. My question is, what do you know about the process that the city intends from this point forward? Yes, we need to express ourselves to City Hall, to the mayor and council now, and just so they know there's huge support for keeping the view corridors and the importance of them, but what can we look forward to as other places where it'll become critical to insert ourselves?
Well, let me comment on your first point first. I must say that one of my biggest objectives is to raise in this conversation the interests of those thousands who have not been included, who are not thought about. I don't think almost anyone, when they hear there's a trade-off between a public view corridor and social housing or affordable housing, ever really thinks about the thousands that are enjoying those views and the spaciousness. If nothing else happens in this conversation, but those people become key stakeholders in the conversation, and their opinions are valued, then this will be a very good thing to happen. Because there just are so many thousand of those silent people. Many of them don't even realize that what might happen is they would lose that view, that peekaboo that they've enjoyed. And we do need to make sure that they are brought into the conversation in a big way. In regard to what the council's going to do, we don't know right now. The staff have to report back on the process that they are going to undertake. Unfortunately, we don't have a permanent director of planning right now. We have a very good temporary director of planning, but we don't have the power and prowess of a permanent director of planning. And so I'm anxious that the quality of that analysis may suffer simply because the judgments about the individual parts of it will be more political than technical. You know, if Peter Busby was brought in to do the study, I would be much happier. If Bob Thompson was brought in to do the community engagement, or someone like yourself or others, I would be much happier. We just don't know yet. And we'll have to wait, all of us, anxiously to see that. The first issue I ask you to really address, though, is, are we ready for a review? Number one. And number two, do we want to consider one or two corridors for elimination when in fact we have some kind of proposal there? Or do we want to only deal with these when we do a comprehensive review? And then number three, make it clear that when that review is done, it is comprehensive and holistic. It involves the public. It has proper cost-benefit analysis, not just from people's gains and losses, but also the whole community's gains and losses. Those are the kind of messages that matter to me, and I think help our planning department say the right thing to council.
From the back, yep, go down.
We'll make sure we'll get to you with the questions. Thank you so much for, if you can kind of keep it on warm.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I was kind of wondering about this appeal to livability and kind of in the climate of the housing crisis, wondering about like livability for all. Like, can we leverage this policy to actually be livable for all? Like, one of the, or I guess, yeah, if you've heard about Architects Against Housing Alienation, they're a very, very cool group of architects that have proposed a gentrification tax, which I think could be really interesting in this context. Like the apartments that you've talked about that are along this view corridor that are gaining value because of this policy, can we create a gentrification tax for this view that has created unearned value and put that into affordable housing units in other areas of the town, or city, I mean. It just feels like this appeal to livability and to views and to this, like I really understand that and I value that, and I think it's something that we should hold on to, but it really feels, frankly, a bit tone deaf when you walk through the downtown east side. Like, I'm just like, what? I'd be curious about your thoughts on that.
I'll start because I appreciate this question as much as any question that's come forward. The question is, you know, she appreciates the issue, the focus on livability, but also who's the livability for? Is it really reaching everyone in a time of affordability crisis where some people can't even be in the equation? And are there other ways? And is that roughly your question? The way that I look at this is, it is fundamentally wrong to say the answer to affordability is to give up quality of life. To me, thank you. To me, we have to honor the fact that there is a whole generation of people that have been left out. But when is the last time you have seen a strategy in this city to secure affordable housing broadly? We haven't seen a strategy. I could tell you from my own work, and I don't pretend to have a holistic view anymore, locations where there could be tens of thousands of affordable housing units, and landowners who have already said they would do rental housing only, and they would do worker housing only, and they are happy to do that. That's not come before the council. That's not been motivated by the council or by the planning department.
Well, the current approval process at City Hall involves speedy approval for rental housing.
Yeah.
And an insistence that the developers of rental housing prescribe between 20 and 30% of the housing at affordable levels.
That's right.
All of the projects I'm working on have that, whether it's in Toronto, Ottawa, or Vancouver.
And that's a good thing, but it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't still reach that huge cadre of what I think are the first, you know, the families just coming together, who are having their first children, who don't want to go into the deep suburbs and have an hour-and-a-half drive. It deals with some of them, but it doesn't deal with enough of them. I've said, and I've said it very publicly, we need to have a strategy for secure, middle-income, affordable housing, as we see in cities like Madrid and Sydney and Melbourne, where they are identifying that no longer can we expect the marketplace to deliver. We have to help the community, we have to help the developers deliver by opening up some new ideas. See, the one thing I want to help you understand, I hope, is that when you set zoning, you set value. So if you casually set zoning, the value goes up. And guess who the beneficiary is? It's the existing landowner. I always say my grandmother was the worst speculator I know. She bought her house for $42,000. She wants $2.5 million for it now because someone said a three-story apartment could go there. She hasn't done a thing. She hasn't even kept the house up. But she wants that extra value. That's the natural thing about our whole system. So we have to work to moderate that, working with the development community in locations where there's still land value opportunity. And in fact, that was good to see that talked about in that article in the Daily Hive, where they said even some of the things that have been talked about, the values are already gone up. It'll be hard for a developer to buy that land, and it'll be too expensive. So I think the answer isn't a casual one, oh, let's get rid of a view corridor here, or let's get rid of a park there, or let's get rid of some quality. We're intelligent people. We can do all that and build affordable housing in our city. We don't want to leave anyone out.
Could you respond directly to the question about the gentrification tax? Would you support something like that?
The question was, could I speak to the issue of the densification tax? Gentrification tax. There is already a gentrification tax. I don't know if you know that. Every time there's a redevelopment with a rezoning, we call community amenity contribution that has to be paid and a development charge that has to be paid. Those are right now to pay for amenities. Those could be used to pay for more affordable housing, and that may be part of, in fact, the new formula to give secure affordable housing for the middle income people. So I'm worried about just a blunt tax that just casually is there. You know, you talked about the people on the edge of the corridor and they're getting all this value by accident. They're not getting all this value by accident. They're just keeping the value of what they invested in rather than having it stoled away. You know, it's really a question of letting everyone get value in our city. So I prefer a more holistic strategy.
Oh, I got to do this director's privilege here.
Okay.
So you may or may not have heard the provincial government has been kind of busy last week in terms of a number of bills that we're talking about: transit-oriented development, multiple dwelling developments as of right, changes towards fees, the elimination of CAC systems into a new form of cost for developers. Any thoughts? And advice, I should say.
We're getting off topic, but anyway, I'll talk about it. You know when we did a good job? Not when someone laid a trip on us about how they thought it was better than all of us put together could figure out with some law that makes sense in Victoria but doesn't make sense in Kelowna. We did the best job when we established some principles as a community here in Vancouver. And then we worked with our citizens together. Thousands of us worked together to figure out the solutions. I love it when the province says, here's some objectives, here's some principles we'd like you to abide by. I don't like it when they remove the powers of the local government just to say you're going to get this and going to get that. And you know why? There are too many unintended consequences. And they're not good, many of them. So yes, you might get something good. I'm not arguing about that. But don't go for that if you're going to also get a lot of things that are bad. So I would rather do a collaborative thing with our community. And I think the province could help to set models so that every municipality could know how to do that and could help in many, many ways. But I'm just leery when someone tries to overlay something on top of everyone else without ever talking. Do you know about this? Have you given your opinion on all these? No.
I have to then also pass it on to Peter as a designer. and you see these kinds of actions coming in from Victoria towards, I think, what form should be built, where should they built. How do designers, like as a designer, how do you see those kinds of, I think, instructions from Victoria kind of passing on to, I think, as a person in design?
Generally, I think design control should rest in the community, not in Victoria or in Toronto or Ottawa. It should rest in the community. We should be able to define our own future by our preferences, by the views we like, by the places we like to go. And so I think that's the most important thing. I think if we're getting laws overlaid on top of those things, we should probably fight back if they destroy things that we value as a community. So far, I don't follow what's going on in Victoria very well, but so far I've heard of things like within 250 meters of a transit stop, you can have a 20-story apartment building. To me, that makes sense. That makes sense to me as a general overlay. That's a very short walk, and that's what should be done. I think repealing CACs and all those other things is going to have horrific financial consequences on the community. I've got one development application rezoning underway in Vancouver right now, and the tax that City Hall is extracting from that project is over $10 million. Where does that money go?
Right.
Does it result in affordable housing? Does it result in benefits to the poor, or does it just go into the coffers and get spent on other things? I don't know, but again, 34 years ago there weren't any of those charges. You just built your building.
But maybe I could also comment, just to keep us going here. I was a part of inventing the CACs in Vancouver. And our idea, our idea was not that they go into general revenue,
Right.
that they go in to cut, taxes for people. They were meant to go in where we had development to pay for the amenities that people insisted on, so that the average taxpayer wouldn't have to pay for them.
Right.
The average taxpayer says, I'm comfortable living here. Why should I let a stranger in and then have to pay for their community center? And that was our idea.
A prime example under your regime was the development of downtown South. All of the developers who built there contributed to the creation of that park.
That's right.
Between Richards and Seymour and Davie
Yep.
and North. And it's a wonderful park, and it's lively and it's used. And if those contributions hadn't been directed to create that park, it would not exist.
And then what happened, and I deal with this in my book, I called it The Greed of City Hall. I'll say that. About 10 or 12 years ago, there was this idea that maybe all that money should just go into general revenue. And at that moment, we lost the cause and effect.
Right.
And that was, to me, a problem, a bad thing. And frankly, if it's causing the public to think, well, we're just paying high fees and we're not seeing any benefits, then I can understand what the province is doing. But that doesn't mean that the whole concept was wrong. It means that it's been applied not very intelligently.
The other aspect of that is the developers don't pay those fees.
Right.
The people who rent or buy their buildings pay for them.
Right.
So if you're talking about affordability issues, the higher those taxes are, the less affordable housing is.
There's a lady here who's been trying to speak for a long time. I just feel sorry for her.
We
Thank you
purposely
so
have
much.
plenty of time to talk, so please, go ahead.
Casually putting my hand up every now and then. So one of the most interesting comments that I heard out of...
Speak right into
Speak
your
right in the mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
So one of the more interesting comments that I heard when you were speaking was that rather than focusing on view cones as a way to... It's almost...
Oh, there we go.
Is this...
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the more interesting comments that I heard when you were speaking was something slightly offhand that came up where you're saying that there's possibilities for other ways to address social housing that's not even being looked at by City Hall, let alone being spoken of. Would you be able to give examples of some of those things that aren't being discussed that could be a solution, and maybe your insight into why it wouldn't be something that they'd be investigating? And I'm thinking about this especially because in the provincial as well as federal government, their priority is, again, the housing crisis, but also that intergenerational wealth gap that's been created by real estate ownership. So if there's extra things they're not looking at, what are they? Why isn't it on the table? And what do you think could be done about it?
Well, I won't try to speak comprehensively about that, but I will give you two examples, one of which I would say is geographic and one of which is organizational. A geographic one, very easy illustration. Clark Drive. You know, we all know where Clark Drive is. If you look west of Clark Drive, it's now industrial zoning for warehouses. There's not much there, but there's a big slope. If you look east of Clark Drive, it's a lovely neighborhood called Granby Woodlands. Along Clark Drive, you could have all the warehousing along in the bottom, and on top you could have a series of buildings, taller buildings, towers, and I've done it. So you can house about 12,000 people. Related to that, I'm now working in an area which fortunately the city is supporting, called the Creative District along Great Northern Way. And there, they're proposing housing that would be for the workers, the creative workers that are there. And they're also saying it would only be rental. They're prepared to say no condos, they'll just do rental. That will give a level of affordability to a lot of people. So there's just a geographic case in point. The one for the Creative District is being supported by the city, but it took a lot of conversation. The one on Clark Drive has not even been considered because we have this idea in this region that anything that's defined as industrial right now, even if it's in the heart of the city, has to be preserved. And I just think that needs to be thought about more intelligently with all the other needs we have. An organizational one is a model that I particularly enjoyed in Madrid. What they have there is what they call nonprofit home ownership. A lot of young people, like the people we were talking about earlier, you know, I could say to them, and I did at a convention of students recently, well, you know, you're going to be lucky because you won't have to pay very much for your housing and because it's rental. And they all booed me. They said, no, we want what you had, the ability to build some wealth, to have a pension plan or to have a legacy plan for our children. But we have to do that in the context that housing prices are too high. What they did in Madrid is that they, a collaboration between government and the private sector, they developed housing, they put it on the market at not any profit in exchange for other benefits that the developers got, and people could build equity. So over 5 or 6 years, they built enough equity that they could jump into the housing market in the old-fashioned way. So it was a window, it was a gateway into home ownership for them too, and then they could build the equities for their families. Also in Rotterdam, because of the war and everything got demolished in Rotterdam, they have a whole series of very large nonprofit housing companies. And they build some profitable housing, and they subsidize some other housing to make it nonprofit. We've not got into any of that very much here. Now, we have one example in Whistler, I think, where we have some worker housing that was built that in a similar model. But we haven't gotten very much into it. And we're going to have to get into it, I think, if we really do want to address affordability. Affordability can come through security of that, which means you have to have government money added to private money. Can't expect a private developer just to pay for that, even with amenities and benefits. Affordability also comes when you can make a good deal with a developer in places where other things aren't traded off. And affordability also will ultimately come with different ways that we're going to live together, but I won't get into that.
Okay, there's a lot of issues that I have, but one of them is I was born in Vancouver, and some things have improved over the years with convenience, etc., but livability is not very good right now, unfortunately. I have luckily I have a place in downtown, but I used to have peekaboo views of the mountains, but then the Shangri-La went up and I can't see a thing now. But apparently on Robson, on Harrow, there's going to be a huge building that's going to be, I don't know, 55 stories tall and 15 stories tall. It's going to block our whole block. No one can see anything. I don't know how that can happen. Who gave them the right to design a building like that is what I'm kind of wondering. It's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't fit into the neighborhood. So I'm just wondering, who do we?
Well, I think you should be speaking to City Hall for sure, because there's a development application, maybe a rezoning application, and you should certainly put input into that. In the past, there was a fellow at City Hall called Ralph Siegel. That was his name. And he was a brilliant urban designer, and he worked with architects, and they'd come in with a scheme, and Ralph would say, okay, let's deal with that. How can we do this? How can we shape that so that you can get all your density, but we can still look after the neighbor's interests? Now, I'm not trying to say that the view corridors will always save that view that you had and now have lost. Some views are going to be lost just from development, but we said back in 1989 that we're only saving certain views and we were going to let other views go. So that was never our social contract. Our social contract is the ones we have, or the one, and we've defined together as a community, are the ones we're going to save. But the other thing that was just so sweet in Vancouver were those years when a developer's architect would come and work with what amounted to a city architect, and they would work out how to do these buildings. And they would think about the neighbors, and they would think about the views, and they couldn't solve everyone's problems, but they could find a solution. I don't see that happening as much. I don't know why, and I'm not being critical. Maybe there's too much volume, I don't know. But I just have a great belief in that collaborative urban design.
Interaction between planners and architects and developers making proposals changed dramatically with COVID.
Yeah.
Because everything was online. You couldn't go, I could always go and sit in Ralph Siegel's office or Larry Beasley's office and say, look, here's a proposal, what do you think? And we'd sketch and boom. Ralph would always add a little Pomo hat and then we'd leave. Probably most of those people don't know what that means. But the whole online thing, the whole COVID thing has changed that relationship. So maybe we need new wheels to allow that interaction.
And I say we're done with COVID now. Let's get back to co-design.
Right. Question, Mr. Todderan.
Does it work?
Okay.
Since the 2009 review has been brought up a few times, I think there's two really important things to put on the record publicly about that review that frankly haven't been said publicly up until now. And they're the reasons why I'm nervous, because I'm actually on the record saying, given the huge staggering crises that our cities and our city in particular faces, it is reasonable to ask the question, do we still value the things we valued before? In the face of a housing crisis, in the face of an affordability crisis, a climate crisis, a public health crisis, etc. Do we still value the things we valued before? I think that is a reasonable question to ask. But I'm 100% with Larry that it needs to be a rigorous and not a political and lazy, expeditious conversation. Two things about the 2009 review. One, with respect to, I agree with everything Larry said about the review, except one thing he said, where he said, I found a dispassionate time to talk about that review. That is not true. 100% there was massive political pressure in 2009 to get rid of the view corridors.
Right.
The pressure was from developers and from architects. They're architects who actually were saying to me and my staff, people don't care about the view corridors anymore.
Right.
So you should allow our project to proceed. And in the face of that pressure, and I think they were frankly testing the fact that Larry and Ann were gone, and here's a 36-year-old city planner who's the director of planning now, we can roll over him. And they were testing the resolve of City Hall in the context of the view corridors. This was not dispassionate. This was an active campaign to get rid of the view corridors.
Just to be clear, I was saying the dispassion was among you guys
In
that
our
did
work.
it. Yeah.
And you're correct in that we stepped back and said, I'm not going to give in to individual pressure on individual projects.
Right.
We're going to do the review that Ray and Larry always said there was going to be. There was always going to be a 10-year review. It never happened.
Yeah.
We're going to do the review that had always been promised. We're going to look at it, and we're going to test the theory that the public doesn't care about view corridors.
Right.
And we're going to see if that's true. And so out of that exercise came the answer, yes, the public does care. I think we replicated many of the surveys, and the results were very similar. And a lot of people said, we had no idea the view corridor policy was even there. But now that we understand what it's been doing, we applaud it, and we care about it. So the council, who had been predisposed to get rid of the view corridors then too, it's very similar to the moment we're in right now.
Yeah.
The council at the time was predisposed to get rid of the view corridors. At the last minute, they balked. And it was literally the month before the 2010 Olympics. It was January in 2010 that the view corridor review was brought to council. And they didn't want the international black eye right before the Olympics of getting rid of the view corridors. So at the last minute, they said we're going to support the complete preservation, and we ended up adding the 4 more. Right. That is, I tell you that history because I think the moment we're in right now is remarkably similar. It is deja vu. And so I think we're in another example where the public is going to have to decide, do you care about the view corridors or not? And in the absence of a strong and compelling voice, I think the result will be different than it was in 2010. That's my first point. The second point, the most important thing that came out of the view corridor work was not the addition of the 4 additional view corridors. We helped council craft a motion after they supported the view corridors that said, let's find additional density in the downtown outside of the view corridors. Let's try to have our cake and eat it too.
Right.
Because everybody wanted the density, everybody wanted the amenities that the density would pay for. And that led to something called the tall building strategy, which led to 6 or 8 additional tall buildings and more height in the downtown out of the view corridors. And this goes to Larry's point that you don't have to make it a lazy trade-off of this or that. Of course there should be more density and more height opportunities, et cetera, in the context of places like our downtown. Whether or not we trade that off with individual or general views or not is a specific question, but it's not as simple as one or the other. And what we did in 2009 illustrates that. Right.
And I would just comment on what you said to this audience and the audience online, that puts you in a very important position with a very big responsibility. If the inclination of the day is not to have wide and sustained public engagement, you're just going to have to express your view any way you can, as fast as you can, in order to not have that bias go forward. My point when I was talking about the work that was done on the review, very importantly, was there was a strong planning department who was not biased. And so, yes, the political bias was there. It's there from time to time. But that's nicely balanced when you have a strong planning department that, number one, can appeal to the public, and number two, can bring things to the attention of council they may not have thought about. And that's what's maybe not there now. We don't have a director of planning now. The planning department is not as strong as it was in those years. And that means you, as the public, have to be strong.
Excellent. Oh,
Do you want to introduce who you are? Because I'm getting texts.
Yeah.
Getting
I was chief planner for Vancouver between 2006 and 2012. Brent Todderin. I replaced Larry and Ann when they retired, if one can ever replace Larry and Ann.
Remember to follow him on X too. He's a very great.
It's called
urban
Twitter.
Twitter. Oh, we'll call it Twitter. Yes, Twitter. Yes, we won't call it X. We'll call it Twitter. Sorry, and more questions. We have the room till 8:30. So, and they were very purposely and generously. Larry actually said that he wanted much more dialogue as opposed to the old school kind of lecture. And so,
I'm a big believer in to give to get. So I gave and I get. And I'm not on the left and I'm not on the right. I'm a centrist here. I guess the real question is how did this come about, the thrust of this? Because it seemed to have been brewing in the back room somewhere, and Peter Meisner introduced the motion. I'm not going to weigh in on Meisner's experience in planning, but given the view cone history and the people that have lived here and enjoyed it, something seems to have transpired. And the economic, what I want to really ask about is that how does the city of Vancouver, and this is where it frustrates me, I have a bit of affordability background, how does the city of Vancouver get its head around within the planning department? Because a lot of planners lack the economic analysis required to really understand affordability from a land perspective. So if I make any kind of variance change to a view cone, if I'm allowing density within that cone, it's an automatic land lift. But the analysis that's required around that land lift for other view cones, that it's a domino effect. So what really gets me is that how do we bring this analysis into the city, right? It used to be the real estate department. Maybe you remember Ted Price back in the day in the 80s, and there's only like 4 guys there. And I remember going in once and asking them, what do you think of this internal rate of return on this project? And they didn't know what it was, and have things grown much? And so how do we get around to that? Because planning is becoming more economic, and it's lagging in that capability.
Well, let me answer comment, I would say, on both of your questions. Your first question, I do not want anyone to go out of this room thinking I'm pointing my finger at some counselor who's doing something silly. That counselor had very good intentions. That counselor was thinking very hard about the question that was posed by the lady in the back of the room about the people left out and struggling with affordability and how we achieve affordability. So occasionally, as you are dealing with a big set of issues in a community, cities are changing constantly and certain issues pop up. As you're dealing with those issues, you struggle to find fast answers. And it is not at all unusual that every few years something as conceptual as view corridors will come forward and say, well, let's just trade that off for something that seems so immediately tangible. So to me, I don't mind the question being raised. I just think in answering the question, we don't depend on that casualness. That we have a proper study and that we include all aspects that I've said over and over again. That's my first point. My second point is, I love your second question because I go around the world talking to planning departments about adding an understanding of economics. I even give courses on land use pro formas, which are just a development economic model that many planners have never heard of. In fact, one planner once said to me, I don't want to know about it because I might be biased. Well, over the world, planners are now changing. We were very lucky in my generation. We had a strong real estate arm. I never did any policy issue without that real estate person right beside me telling me in my ear, here's what's happening. Here's what's happening to values. Here's what's happening to, the development potential and all of that. It was right there. And those people, it was Michael Flanagan and Bruce Maitland and people like that. If the planning department or if the city doesn't have that, and I don't know because I've not checked that, then you have to do what we did back in our day when we did this. We hired the best. Jay Wallenberg was the best guy who you could possibly have to do this, and he kind of focuses on the economic side only. And so we do have that expertise in this town. So when we have these fundamental issues, whether it's the view corridors, or the Broadway plan, or densifying downtown, or the False Creek Flats, whatever we want to do, the planners have to have on their team economic understanding and prowess. And it may not be them, but they can certainly have it on their team. You know, when I'm out in the world planning and I go into a room, I'm the only planner. There's an economist, there's an architect, there's a whole bunch of different expertise, but there's always, I make sure, there's always a person who understands urban land economics. So you can do that either in-house, which I think is best, or you can do that with consultants.
Question there? Oh, yeah, that's council. Actually, I forgot to do the verboten thing and ask elected officials who are here, and we have one here, Councillor.
Hi, hi everybody. Pete Fry, I'm a city councillor. Larry, appreciate your comments about the view cone from Queen Elizabeth Park and getting Park Board to step up, but I got some bad news for you. I guess nobody caught the news today. Sorry, too soon. And to your point about the gentrification tax, a specific tax, it is something that we've asked the province for. BC Assessment has said no, it's one residential class only, so we do have to rely on things like CACs, which are being kind of reconsidered right now through the new provincial legislation. So there's a complicated nuance there. But I guess what I wanted to say, and just sort of throw out there, is as a councillor who voted to refine the view cone as a compromise to, I heard your point and I agreed with you on eliminating the view cones was a bad sort of step forward. And in fact, refining the view cones, perhaps that's a conversation we can have. But recognizing that Councillor Meisner and the ABC party have put a lot of stake into this motion and they want to see some kind of results when the staff report comes back. And I'm a big believer in trying to make things less bad and figure out how we can find the compromise. So what is the compromise when they come back with a proposal that will be pick A, B, or C? What does a less bad option look like? Are there some that we should sacrifice, or should we just go for a blanket approach? Because I think that we have to recognize the practical implications, and I appreciate that a lot of people will be writing in to share their thoughts, but also recognizing the political reality of the scenario that we'll find ourselves in.
Councillor, I would be speaking contrary to my principles if I said to you, well, I think this one's less valuable than that one, or something's less valuable, because my opinion's no more important, frankly, than your opinion. And it's no more important than the opinion of everyone in this audience. So to me, the least satisfactory way would be to convene this study, but to do it with incredible rigor and not let it be done casually and not let any politician, regardless of party, influence it from just a political angle. But to ask these citizens if they want view corridors or how they want them. I would actually probably say that we shouldn't have the question of yes or no, but we should have the question of, with the technology we have today, can we define these corridors better? Can we evaluate how these corridors are working on a day-to-day basis for doing what our intentions were? And can we really articulate and count the people that are the beneficiaries rather than just stay with the mysterious idea, which is not right, that only that one member of the public who happens to stand at the exact location is getting the benefit? If we could do all of that, and if you could enable that in the resolution that you respond to the staff report, and if you could make sure as a councillor that they give you a systematic, methodologically appropriate and defensible study, then that's not a bad thing.
But it should be in parallel with another study which shows what density and height opportunities are available outside the corridors.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
again,
Right.
Falls Creek Flats.
Yeah.
Right.
Broadway corridor. You know, there's an awful lot of potential.
Right.
I could probably tell you where 250,000 people could be housed.
Well, to me, that example I use, you take one building in the middle of a corridor downtown and you get five stories of affordable housing or 20 units, or you take that area along Clark Drive and you get 5,000 units or whatever the number is. That's a different, it's a different quotient. And I think I really agree with Peter that should be done in parallel, because it is time for us to think about that as a city, because we do want to be able to continue to grow. I'm beginning to believe that maybe our downtown is close to capacity. Maybe it's time that we create some new communities of density. I want to say something very positive about this region, that the other municipalities in this region, I think, are doing a very good thing by bringing the regional town centers to life.
Right.
You know, I was a young fellow in 1975, I think it was, when Harry Lash put that regional town center policy in place, and we waited most of my life for it to happen, and it didn't happen. But over the last few years, every one of those town centers connected to transit with one of his stations in one of the best locations have come to reality. And literally our growth is really being handled in those town centers. We can do something that's more modest to think about at a neighborhood level how we do that in Vancouver, working with our citizens, I think. And there is, Peter and I were looking at the map just before we we got together tonight, and he was saying, well, look at this area. There's no view corridors there, and there's also no development there. And look at those, we could see without much study. Imagine if you enabled a very, very careful study that had the economic impacts and et cetera. You worry just like me that one of the problems with, say, even the Broadway plan is that a lot of the footprint is on affordable built housing that's already in place. And we should all be worrying about that, because we can't replace it, no matter how much we try with our gadgets and everything.
A great example would be the comparison between the Home Depot on Cambie Street and the one on Terminal Avenue.
Right.
The one on Terminal Avenue probably is 40 or 50 acres of horizontal parking, large single-story warehousing, all the garden center and so on. You can buy almost everything in that store at the Home Depot on Cambie Street, which is part of a structured multi-use housing on top. So what's the difference? It's a kilometer away. So change the zoning.
So I don't know, I hope that's answered to your questions in a respectful way. Or Counselor, I'm just reminded of the history of 2009, where enough people said no, and so they didn't do it. No, I know.
All right. Well,
this gentleman would like to speak.
right, I know everybody wants to ask questions, and we're out of time. We're at 8:30. Well, how you can become part of it, you can have even more opportunities, is to join the city program mail list. And please feel free to kind of join our list, as there's obviously a hunger for this type of dialogue. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank Larry. I would like to thank Peter for coming out tonight to kind of give us this overview for what we did and what we still had yet to do. And stay tuned for more opportunities. But I know that Peter and Larry are going to be around if you want to kind of come up and talk to them.
We will.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Oh, photo? Photo? Anthony?